The first person who laughed when I said I wanted to be a doctor was my father. The second was my mother. That was the part people always got wrong later. When the story became useful enough for them to romanticize it, they imagined I was doubted gently. That my parents worried about cost, stress, competition. That maybe they just wanted me to have a practical backup plan and use the wrong tone one bad night at the dinner table. No, they laughed. Not kindly. Not nervously. Not in that awkward way people laugh when they think your dream is a little big, but still want you to feel safe trying. They laughed the way people laugh when they think reality belongs to them. Like they were protecting the world from my delusion by humiliating it out of me early. My name is Dr. Leela Monroe, the man who looked over his pork chops and mashed potatoes and said, "You? A doctor?" Like he had just heard the punchline to a bad joke? Was my father, Dennis, the woman who smiled into her iced tea and said, "Honey, let's aim for something that suits you better." Was my mother, Karen, and the night they threw me out at 18 for refusing to pick a smaller life, I left with 2 duffel bags. 1 scholarship acceptance packet, and a promise to myself so quiet it almost sounded like prayer. One day, I'll come back wearing proof. If this story reaches into something real in you, subscribe now. Some betrayals don't kill your dream. They just make you carry it farther than you should have had to. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a brick ranch house with a carport. A narrow hallway, lined with family photos. And a kitchen that always smelled like coffee, bleach, and whatever my mother had cooked hours before but still managed to make feel like obligation instead of comfort. We were not poor. We were not chaotic. From the outside, we looked like a respectable middle-class family with trimmed hedges, holiday lights in December, and enough church attendance to keep the neighbors generous in their assumptions. Inside, we specialized in hierarchy dressed as practicality. My father sold medical equipment to private practices and regional hospital systems, which meant he spent his days around doctors without ever becoming one, and then came home full of second-hand authority. He liked polished shoes, ballpoint pens clipped inside shirt pockets, and making sure everyone at the table knew he understood how the world really worked. My mother taught part-time at an elementary school and had the kind of beauty that aged into sharpness rather than softness. She kept the house clean enough to feel judged in, and spoke in the calm tone women use when they want cruelty to sound instructional. Then there was my younger brother, Connor. Connor was not mean. That matters. He was simply easy. Easy to love. Easy to forgive. Easy to imagine as promising because he never asked for more than what had already been culturally prepared for him. He played baseball, slept through half of algebra, forgot chores, and grew into the sort of broad-shouldered, casual confidence people instinctively describe as leadership before he has actually done anything to earn it. I was the opposite kind of child. Too observant, too serious, too exact. The girl who raised her hand too often and irritated adults not because I was wrong, but because I remembered what they'd said before and noticed when they contradicted themselves later. Adults don't love that in daughters. Not in the South. Not in houses like ours. In our family, ambition looked good on paper, only if it didn't require anyone to reorganize the family's idea of who you were allowed to become. Connor wanted to maybe do business one day, and my father called that smart because it was broad and masculine, and still left room for the world to come flatter him into shape. I wanted medicine. Not because of prestige, because of 8th grade, because of a biology teacher with tired eyes and exact explanations, because my grandmother's stroke when I was 14 had left me in too many hospital rooms smelling antiseptic, stale coffee, and institutional blankets, while I watched overworked women in scrubs keep entire floors from collapsing emotionally. Because I discovered early that I loved systems under pressure. I loved the way one decision could change an outcome. The way knowledge mattered when panic arrived. The way good medicine looked like competence disguised as calm. I did not romanticize it. That was one of the things that made me dangerous in my parents' eyes. I wanted it for the right reasons, which meant I would be harder to shake off. By 16, I was volunteering at a county clinic on Saturdays through a school partnership program, mostly filing, supply carts, sanitizing exam rooms, restocking tongue depressors and gloves. But I watched. I listened. I paid attention to triage, tone, hierarchy, body language, how nurses managed families, how residents moved too fast, how one attending could walk into a room and lower the emotional temperature simply by sounding sure. I came home one day in a scrub top they'd let me borrow because a patient had bled on my shirt. And my mother looked me over and said, "You seem to enjoy pretending." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt worst, because it was so diagnostic of her. She could not tolerate aspiration in me, unless it was still decorative. If I had wanted to be around medicine as a receptionist or scheduler or pharmaceutical rep's wife, she could have sold that as adjacent enough to propriety. Doctor meant competing in a realm she thought belonged to people born into cleaner pedigrees, larger bank accounts, and sons. My father was less subtle. He believed in ranking things. People. Profession. Outcomes. He had spent so long around physicians while selling to them that he carried himself like a man who had looked behind the curtain and decided only certain families should bother auditioning. "You know who gets into med school?" he once asked when I was 17 and talking about summer science programs. "People with parents who've been planning for it since kindergarten." I said, "Some people plan for it themselves." He laughed. That laugh. Dry. Dismissive. The kind meant to save you from needing anyone else's rejection because he was already administering it in-house. My high school counselor believed in me. That is another dangerous thing in stories like this. Outside witnesses. Because once somebody not invested in your family system looks at you and says yes, the family has to either adjust or escalate. Mrs. Rivera helped me map prerequisites, summer applications, scholarship targets, test timelines, financial aid strategy, and the kind of route smart working class or lower middle class students build when no one at home expects them to aim higher than locally acceptable success. I got in everywhere I applied. Not Ivy League. That was never the fantasy. But strong schools, solid programs, one accelerated pre-med honors track with a scholarship large enough to make the whole thing possible if I worked, borrowed carefully, and lived like someone who understood what pressure meant. I carried the acceptance packet home in my backpack like it was made of currant. I can still remember the exact feel of it in my hand at the dinner table. Heavy paper. University crest. My own name in proper print. The room smelled like pork chops, butter, pepper, and floor cleaner, because my mother had mopped that afternoon. Connor was talking about batting averages. My father had one of his sales journals open beside his plate, which annoyed my mother but never enough to become conflict. I waited for a pause. Then I said, I got into Crescent State's honors pre-med program. My mother looked up first, then my father. Neither spoke. I went on because silence, in my family, had always been a trap designed to make you reduce yourself before anyone else had to bother. They offered me a major scholarship. I said, if I combine that with loans and campus housing, I can make it work. That was when my father laughed. One short, disbelieving burst. Then another longer one when he realized I was serious. You? He said. Connor looked between us, like he wasn't sure whether he should be amused or uncomfortable. I stared at my father. He shook his head and cut into his pork chop. Leela, do you understand how competitive med school is? Yes. How expensive? Yes. How many people wash out? Yes. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and then said, Then why are you acting like this letter means anything? My mother smiled into her iced tea, the way women smile when they think they are keeping a situation from becoming embarrassing by assisting reality. Honey, she said, let's aim for something that suits you better. There it was. Suits you better. Not can you do it. Not do you want it badly enough. Not what's the plan. No. Suitability. The family court had convened and my body. Face. Tone. Classe position. And gender had already been weighed. What does that mean? I asked. My mother set down her glass. It means nursing is wonderful. Physician assistant is wonderful. Healthcare administration would fit your strengths. You're organized. You're good with people. But doctor is... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. My father did it for her. Doctor is for killers, he said. What? Top scorers. Rich kids. Legacy families. Maniats. You're disciplined. Sûr. But you don't have that kind of edge. I felt my whole face go hot. Not with shame. With clarity. Because for the first time, they were not even pretending to be practical. They were ranking human possibility by category and telling me my category was already settled. I got in. I said. My father leaned back. You got into a pre-med program. I got the scholarship. That's not med school. No. I said, it's how I get there. He looked at me for a second too long. Then he said, or how you bury yourself in debt chasing a fantasy because you're too stubborn to know your limits. That sentence split the room cleanly. Connor kept eating. Of course he did. In families like mine, boys learn early that keeping their heads down during a daughter's humiliation still lets them collect the benefits of innocence later. My mother reached for the casserole dish and said, We don't want you wasting your best years trying to prove something. I remember saying, very quietly, To who? My father answered immediately, To the world. No, that was the lie. Not the world. Them. Everything in my body knew it. But girls raised in houses like mine don't explode the first time. We explain. We present. We offer logic as if logic has ever saved a daughter from a parent committed to misreading her as a form of control. So I laid out the numbers. Scholarship amount. Expected loan burden. Campus job potential. Summer lab work. A path. Not vague hope. A path? My father barely listened. My mother listened only enough to begin shifting from ridicule into moral argument. "We are not paying for this," she said. "I'm not asking you to. We are not co-signing anything reckless. I didn't ask you to." "That attitude," she said softly, "is exactly why I worry." There it was. I could feel the conversation moving toward one of my mother's oldest tricks, converting resistance to unfairness into evidence of poor character. My father closed the journal on the table. "You are not moving 3 states away to play doctor," he said. The room went silent. Connor finally looked up. I stared at my father. "I'm 18 in 6 weeks. And still living in my house?" That line still makes me tired. Even now. Not because it was surprising. Because ownership is the final refuge of weak patriarchs whose daughters become inconveniently real. I earned that scholarship. I said, "You earned a letter?" He said, "Not a career." Then my mother said the sentence that actually changed my life. "If you walk out that door for this," she said, "don't expect to come back when reality teaches you what we're trying to save you from." People always imagine exile being dramatic. It rarely is. No thunder. No shattered dishes. No mother screaming from a staircase. Just a sentence laid down so calmly, it sounds reasonable until you realize it contains a house inside it and your body outside it. I remember looking at both of them and understanding, with a stillness that felt older than 18, that the decision had already been made. Not by me. By them. I was simply being offered the courtesy of pretending it was a lesson. I left 6 weeks later. 2 duffel bags. 1 backpack. The acceptance packet. $480 in savings. A borrowed hatchback from Mrs. Rivera's sister because my parents had made it clear the family car was not a resource for performative rebellion. No goodbye breakfast. No porch photograph. No mother crying into a handkerchief at the curb. My father shook my hand in the driveway like I was a contractor, leaving after giving a bad quote. My mother stood in the doorway and said, "You can still reconsider." I looked at the house. The carport. The hydrangeas. The narrow hallway visible through the screen door, where all the family photos had always stopped just short of telling the truth. Then I said, "No, you can." That was the first honest thing I had ever said to them, without trying to make it survivable. College was harder than they said. Not because I wasn't capable. Because I was. And capability is expensive when no one is cushioning the edge. I worked 2 campus jobs my first year. Front desk shifts in the library and weekend clerical work in a biology lab that smelled like bleach. Dust. And ambition. I ate poorly. Slept too little. And carried the constant background hum of financial fear that middle-class students with supportive parents rarely have to name directly because it has been managed out of their daily life for them. But I was good. Not effortlessly. That's the part I want to say clearly. I was not one of those dazzling prodigies who floated through organic chemistry in a halo of genius and perfect skin. I studied until my eyes hurt. I color-coded pathways. I rewrote notes. I begged office hours. I got 1 B- my second semester and cried in a campus bathroom for 20 minutes because the women in my family were still living in my head. Ready to use any visible stumble as prophecy. Then I adjusted. Got better. Got meaner with my own fear. By sophomore year, I was tutoring underclassmen in physiology. By junior year, I was in a research lab. By senior year, I had the kind of transcript that makes advisors stop saying if and start saying when. My parents did not visit once. Not once. That fact bothers other people more than it bothers me now. At the time, it felt ordinary enough to qualify as weather. My mother called twice a year, usually around Christmas, and maybe my birthday. And even then, only with the careful emotional distance of someone who wanted access without endorsement. My father called less. Connor texted meme, sports takes, and one-word check-ins that kept him technically brother-adjacent without ever requiring him to name what our parents had done. Then came the MCAT. Then interviews. Then waiting. Then the email. Accepted. Crescent State School of Medicine. I was in the student union when it arrived. The cafeteria smelled like fryer oil and over-toasted bread, and too many people's deadlines. I opened the message and stared so long a girl at the next table asked if I was okay. I think I laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. I called Mrs. Joe Rivera first. Not my parents. That mattered. Because by then, celebration had already learned new routes in my body. I did tell them eventually. My mother said, after too long a pause, "Well, that's certainly ambitious." My father said, "Don't confuse getting in with making it through." That line sat with me for years. Not because it broke me, because it explained him. He would rather be right about my collapse than proud of my ascent. Medical school was exactly what medicine always is from the inside. Less television, more fluorescent fatigue, anatomy lab, caffeine breath, quiz banks, worn sneakers, tears in stairwells. The low panic scent of sleep-deprived brilliance packed into lecture halls, pretending this is sustainable because the institution says it has always been done this way. I loved it. Not every minute. But enough? Enough to keep going. Enough that even on the worst days, failed practicals, humiliating pimp questions, dead family members in donor labs, notes that felt bottomless. I still knew this misery belonged to me more honestly than comfort ever had in my parents' house. Residency was harder. That is when medicine stops flattering your fantasy and begins demanding your body. Night shifts. Codes. Residents crying in supply closets. Attendings who weaponized their own survival stories as teaching tools. The stale smell of vending machine, coffee, and sanitizer at 3:17 a.m. The deep, ugly tenderness of seeing somebody's mother die while your own still thought you were playing dress-up with ambition. I chose internal medicine, then chief track. Not because I wanted authority as a personality trait, because I understood systems and pressure, and the human cost of both being managed badly. Somewhere in year 3 of residency, the hospital merged with a private network and began expanding into regional community partnerships. One of the new board-linked donors happened to be involved in the development of a hospital wing in Birmingham, the city I'd left a decade earlier. By then I was 30, tired, leaner in the face, steadier in the eyes, capable in the way women become when the world has repeatedly tried to convert difficulty into proof they are miscast and they have stopped caring. Then the offer came. Chief resident, transitional leadership role, part administrative, part clinical, part training. Attached to the opening of the network's newly restructured internal medicine wing in Birmingham, I read the email 3 times, then shut my laptop, then opened it again. Because of all the forms revenge can take. Being invited home by merit is one of the quietest and most devastating places. I accepted. Then I sat alone in the residence lounge staring at the email while the vending machine hummed beside me and somebody somewhere down the hall laughed too loudly at a joke born of sleep deprivation and institutional despair. Birmingham. The city I had left at 18 with 2 duffel bags and a scholarship packet. The city where my parents still lived in the same brick ranch house, with the same narrow hallway and the same family photos, probably still stopping just short of the truth. The city where my father had laughed first, where my mother had refined that laughter into judgment. And now, without asking them for permission or blessing or a couch to sleep on or a co-signed future, I was being invited back in a white coat with authority attached. Not student authority. Not borrowed authority. Mine. I did not call my parents. That matters. Because old versions of me still might have. Not for approval. For ceremony. To notify them that their daughter had become the thing they had once treated like fantasy and watch the silence on the line try to turn itself into retroactive concern. But by then, celebration had learned better pathways in my life. I called Mrs. Rivera first, then Connor. That second call surprised me. But family is complicated in the dullest possible ways. Connor had never protected me. He had also never truly attacked me. He was the sort of brother who grew up on the easy side of a system and spent half his adult life assuming that neutrality counted as innocence. When he answered, he sounded distracted. Baseball game on in the background. Woman's voice somewhere nearby. Hey, what's up? I'm moving back to Birmingham. Pause. Seriously? I got the chief resident role in the new internal medicine wing. Longer pause. Then, unexpectedly, damn. I smiled despite myself. Yeah. He let out a low whistle. That's wow. That sentence told me something important. Not that he had become deep, that even he understood the scale. Then he asked, with a caution I had never heard from him before, "Are you telling Mom and Dad?" I looked out the hospital window at a parking garage streaked with rain and said, "No." He was quiet for a second. Then, "That's probably smart." There it was. The first real loyalty he had ever shown me. Too late to redeem childhood. Early enough to matter differently. The move happened in July. Hot enough that cardboard boxes felt damp if you held them too long. The drive south smelled like gas station coffee. Warm plastic. And the strange charged air that settles over highways when you are crossing not just miles but older versions of yourself. I rented a small house near the hospital with bad blinds. Excellent natural light. And a porch just wide enough for one chair and a potted herb I fully intended to keep alive and did not. The hospital was newly renovated in the wing I'd been brought in to help lead polished floors. Fresh signage. Over-enthusiastic donor plaques. The faint smell of paint, still trying to pass as sterilized professionalism. Hospitals love optics. Medicine survives despite them. My job was exactly the sort of thing nobody romanticizes correctly from the outside. Scheduling. Staffing. Educational supervision. Moral triage. Patient load redistribution. Intern panic management. Quality review. Attending diplomacy. And enough administrative problem solving to make me nostalgic for the cleaner brutality of exams. I loved it. Not because it was easy. Because I was good at it. That is a kind of peace nobody can give you if they taught you first that your gifts were miscast. A month into the role, a formal donor and community dinner was scheduled to celebrate the new wing. Nothing huge, just local donors, department leads, executives, a few community figures, selected staff, and people with enough money attached to the building to require salmon and neutral table linens. I did not know my father would be there. That sounds implausible, but it isn't. My father had spent decades selling medical equipment into networks exactly like this one. He had contacts. He knew administrators. He liked belonging near professional legitimacy. He liked even more being mistaken for someone who understood it from the inside. I found out 3 days before the event when one of the department coordinators handed me a printed guest list and asked whether I wanted to review any names for seating. There it was. Dennis Monroe. Cara Monroe. I stared at the paper long enough for the coordinator to ask if I was okay. I said yes. That was not exactly true, but it was true enough in the way that matters. Because what I felt wasn't fear. Not anymore. It was pressure memory. The body remembering what it used to cost to be seen by certain people. I almost asked to be seated far from them. Then I thought about being 18 and loading those duffel bags alone. About every exam, every code, every night shift, every petty miracle of endurance they had once called delusion. And I said, no changes. The coordinator smiled and moved on. That night I called Noah. We were still together then. Not yet married. Already serious enough that his toothbrush existed in my house more often than not, and his opinions had the annoying habit of becoming useful, even when I wanted to feel dramatic instead. He listened, then asked the only question that mattered. What do you want the room to feel like? That is one reason I loved him. He never started with, what should you do? Never offered sanctimony disguised as wisdom. He asked about design. I want it to feel ordinary. I said. He was quiet for a second. Then act like your title is the least surprising thing in it. That line saved me. Not just that night. Maybe the next year of my life. Because he was right. If I walked into that room carrying the emotional demand for them to understand what they had done, I would still be inside their architecture. If I walked in like Dr. Lila Monroe, Chief Resident, Internal Medicine, overseeing transition systems in a hospital wing, with my signature already on enough documents to matter. Then they would have to meet me where I actually was. The donor dinner took place on a Thursday evening in a reception space off the renovated atrium. String lights, soft jazz, too many standing tables, the smell of white wine, lemon butter, expensive flowers, and air conditioning, fighting August humidity every time the doors opened. Ivorenavi? Not because it was symbolic. Because it looked like authority without asking for applause. White coat at first for the formal introduction round. Then off during dinner because event space and medicine are always trying to cosplay one another badly. The room was easy enough until it wasn't. I had just finished a conversation with a board member about resident retention when I turned toward the bar and saw them. My father first. Same square shoulders. Same salesman posture. Older now. A little thicker through the waist. Hair less sure of itself. My mother beside him in a cream dress and pearls. Looking exactly like the sort of woman everyone would trust immediately in a room like that, and exactly like the sort of woman who had once told her daughter to aim for something that suited her better. They had not seen me yet. That gave me a full 3 seconds to study them without the old instinct to shrink. My father was scanning name badges. My mother was half listening to some administrator's wife explain a donor luncheon series. Then my father's eyes landed on me. I knew the exact second it happened. Something in his face lost the easy social glaze and became nakedly human. Recognition is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just stillness where there should have been gesture. My mother followed his gaze. Saw me. Saw the name badge. Saw the white coat folded over my arm. Saw the hospital executives who had clearly just been speaking with me as if I belonged there. Because I did. And in one elegant, horrifying second, both of them had to confront the thing they had once treated as comedy, now standing in front of them under professionally flattering lighting. I did not go to them. That matters. They came to me. My father first. Of course. Because fathers like him always believe their gender entitles them to narrate the reunion if they get there quickly enough. Leela. Just my name. No sweetheart. No honey. No emotional shortcut to bridge the years. Interesting. Dad. My mother reached us 2 seconds later. Smile already assembled into the kind of socially respectable surprise. Women like her perform when they realize the truth will now have witnesses. Oh my goodness, she said. We had no idea you were here. That line was so perfect it almost deserved framing. Not, we had no idea you were in Birmingham. Not, we had no idea you'd done this. Just here. As if my presence in the exact hospital wing publicly tied to my title were the only relevant mystery. I smiled. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just accurately. Yes. I said, that's usually how jobs work. My father actually laughed. Too quickly. The laugh of a man trying to get control of a scene already sliding out of his hands. Well, he said. Look at you. I hate that phrase. People only say it when the evidence in front of them has forced an upgrade in tone they had not budgeted for privately. My mother recovered faster. She always did. We always knew you were determined. No, that was the first lie of the evening, and not the last. I looked at her and said, pleasantly enough for the room. That's not exactly how I remember it. My father's face tightened. Good. Because for most of my life, the burden of preserving social comfort in the presence of their revisionism had fallen on me. Not tonight. An administrator approached then, mercifully or strategically, and said, Doctor Monroe, the chief of medicine is looking for you before the remarks. The timing was exquisite. My father heard the title from someone else's mouth. That mattered more than if I had handed it to him myself. I turned slightly. I should go. My mother touched my wrist lightly. That touch almost undid me. Not because it was loving, because it was old. A bodily memory of being redirected. Can we talk after? She asked. There was genuine urgency in her voice now. Not grief. Not joy. The urgency of people who realize the room has just learned a fact that now outranks their previous version. I said, if there's time, and walked away. The opening remarks were exactly the sort of self-congratulatory institutional theater hospitals do when donors are present and mortality has... For one night, I've been politely kept in the wings. But I barely heard them. Because somewhere behind the podium and the glassware and the applause, my 18-year-old self was standing barefoot in the driveway with 2 duffel bags, watching me through time. People talk a lot about healing the inner child. Sometimes all she really wants is accurate seating. After the speeches, I found a quiet corridor near the staff entrance and stood for a minute under fluorescent lights that smelled faintly of floor wax and ice machine air. That was where my mother found me. Alone. Of course. She had always preferred conversations where witnesses could be invoked later but not corrected in real time. Leela. I turned. She looked beautiful. Aged. Yes. But beautifully. Controlled. Tiddy. Composed. That was part of her power all my life. Women like my mother make cruelty harder to prove because they never let it wrinkle them. I meant what I said. She began. We're proud of you. There is a kind of exhaustion that arrives when the lie is so lazy, it insults you twice, once by contradicting the past, and again by assuming you need the new version, badly enough to accept the rewrite. No, I said. That startled her. Just a flicker. Then she said, I'm trying here. I nodded. I can see that. Then why are you being defensive? Defensive. That word. Parents use it when adult children refuse to kneel fast enough before revision. I looked at the door behind her, then back at her face. Because if I was going to say it, and I knew now that I wanted to say it plainly. You laughed, I said. Her expression tightened. Barely. Leela. You laughed. Dad laughed. You told me to aim for something that suited me better. You told me if I left for medical school, not to expect to come back when reality taught me what you were trying to save me from. The corridor went still around us. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor biped once. A cartwheel squeaked. My mother inhaled slowly through her nose, the way she always did when emotional reality threatened to become inconveniently specific. You were very young, she said. That was her defense. Not we were wrong. Not we hurt you. You were young. As if my age had somehow made their cruelty prudent. So were you when you decided what kind of life I was allowed to attempt? I asked. She looked at me then in the way mothers do when their daughters finally stop arranging truth in digestible portions. You have no idea what it was like, she said quietly, to watch you chase something so uncertain. I laughed. One small sharp sound. I know exactly what it was like. I said, you weren't watching me chase something uncertain. You were watching me choose a future you didn't get to rank first. That landed. Because it was true. Not the whole truth, but the load-bearing part. She looked away first. That had never happened when I was young. Not once. Then she said, in a voice I almost might have mistaken for honesty if I had been weaker, we thought we were protecting you. No, people love that sentence because it preserves self-image while conceding just enough harm to sound reflective. I shook my head. No, I said, you were protecting your certainty. She went very still. That was when my father entered the corridor. I do not know how long he had been standing just out of sight. Maybe a few seconds. Maybe longer. He looked between us and understood immediately that the room had already become too true for him to smooth. Still, smoothing was his only language. Can we not do this here? He asked. There it was. Not can we do this honestly. Can we not? Location before substance. Always. I looked at him. For 10 years. I said, I have done almost everything important in my life without either of you. You don't get to manage the venue now." He actually flinched. That surprised me. Because part of me had always believed fathers like mine simply absorbed daughters' pain as ambient inconvenience. But there it was. Mark? Not enough. Mark? Then he said the sentence that changed the entire night. "I thought you'd fail." My mother turned toward him so fast I heard her bracelet hit lightly against itself. "Dennis." But he kept going. Not because he was brave. Because sometimes when cowardly men finally get cornered by enough evidence, truth falls out of them in clumsy pieces. "I thought you'd get hurt," he said. "I thought you'd come back in a year or two and say we were right. I thought—" He stopped, swallowed, looked at the floor. "I thought it would be better if reality broke you before the world had to." That sentence hit me harder than the laughter ever had. Because it was the full confession. Not that he doubted me. That he preferred my early collapse to the risk of his worldview being wrong. My mother whispered, "That isn't what we meant." I turned to her. "Yes." I said, "It is." He just said it in the language you both used privately instead of the language you handed me at the table. No one spoke for several seconds. Then my father did something I had not seen him do in my entire life. He looked ashamed without trying to turn the shame into tone management. "I was wrong," he said. "That should have healed something." It didn't. Not because it was meaningless. Because it was late. That is what so many people misunderstand about apologies from parents. Late truth is still truth. It just does not arrive with the same power it would have had when you still needed it structurally. My mother, predictably, hated that the room had moved beyond her control. "This is not fair," she said. I almost smiled. Exactly. And there it was. The whole decade in one word. Fair. Fair would have been belief. Fair would have been concern without humiliation. Fair would have been disagreeing with my path while still leaving the front door emotionally unlocked. Instead, I got exile with a warning label. So I said the sentence I think I had been carrying since the driveway. "You were right about one thing," I said. They both looked at me. When I walked out, I didn't come back. Then I glanced toward the ballroom, where the donor dinner was still unfolding around white tablecloths and polished silverware, and the kind of smiling professional success my parents had always known how to admire from a safe distance. "I just returned," I said, "with a badge you didn't think I could earn." My mother's face changed then. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to see the first hairline fracture in the structure she had built around this story. Because in her version, my leaving had always been a detour. A season. A dramatic lesson. Not a real life. She no longer outranked. Type karma. If you believe some parents only understand your dream, once it starts impressing other people first. Not because public recognition heals everything. Because some forms of disrespect survive privately until status drags them into better posture. The rest of the evening moved strangely. My parents returned to the ballroom. I stayed in the corridor for another minute until my pulse stopped sounding like a second pair of shoes in the room. Then I went back too. Not because I wanted more confrontation, because this was my hospital. My event. My title. My evening. I was not going to flee from the scene of my own earned life just because the past had shown up underdressed for the truth. People approached me all night. Attendings. Board members. Nurses. Residents. One donor who loved saying chief resident as if the title itself had hand-stitched the napkins. Every time someone spoke to me with professional ease inside my parents' line of sight, something in the social atmosphere shifted a little more. Not in my body, in theirs. That was the real reversal. Not that they suddenly believed in me. That the room believed in me first. At one point, I saw my father standing near the back wall, talking to an administrator I knew from equipment procurement. He kept glancing over toward me with an expression I could not fully read. Pride. Maybe. Grief. Regret. Possibly all three. My mother left early. That did not surprise me. Women like her can survive many things. Loss of narrative control in a room full of social equals is not usually one of them. My father stayed until the end. When the final guests began filtering out and the event staff started clearing glasses, he found me near the atrium doors. The hospital after a donor event has a very particular feeling, expensive flowers drooping slightly under fluorescent light. Stale white wine in half-cleared glasses, and the faint return of clinical smell from the hallways just beyond the decorative zones. He stood there with his coat over one arm and said, "I didn't know how to talk to you when you left." That line almost made me angry again. Not because it was false, because it was so small compared to the damage. "You didn't try," I said. He nodded. No defense. That mattered. Then, very quietly, he said, "I watched your whole speech from the side of the room." I frowned. "What speech?" "The one before the dinner?" He said. "The introduction? They talked about your work? What you're building here?" I said nothing. He kept going. "You sounded like you belonged." That sentence. From my father. He was the closest thing to reverence he had ever offered me. And because I had spent too many years starving for it, I could feel exactly why I must not take the bait now. "I do belong," I said. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Yes." That was enough. Not repair. Enough. He asked if we could have lunch sometime. Not tomorrow. Not Christmas. Not a grand sentimental reunion. Just lunch. I said, "Maybe." That was the truth. Because forgiveness is one question. Access is another. And daughters like me have to learn. Often late. That confusing the two is how your boundaries get rewritten as grace. My mother texted 3 days later. A long message. Too polished. Too edited. Full of words like regret and misunderstanding and difficult season and proud of the woman you've become. I read it twice. Then answered with 5 sentences. I am willing to have contact. I am not willing to rewrite the past. You laughed. You told me not to come back. If we move forward, it will be from truth, not revision. She did not reply for 2 weeks. Then she sent one line. I need time to think. I laughed out loud in my kitchen when I read it. Not cruelly. Just because women like my mother always discover the importance of time only once it is their own version under examination. The months after that were quieter than I expected. My father came to lunch eventually. A diner halfway between his side of town and the hospital. Coffee that tasted burned in a reassuring way. Vinyl booths. Waitresses who called everyone honey. Neutral territory, which is the only kind worth using for truth after enough family damage. He was different there. Smaller. Not weak. Less defended. He admitted things in fragments. The way men do when a lifetime of emotional cowardice has left them without full fluency. That he had been afraid ambition would make me lonely. That he had trusted his own hierarchy of the world too much. That he had confused realism with control. That he had always known I was capable, and found that more frightening than he had ever said, because if I succeeded on a path he could not map, then his whole system of ranking people by likelihood would no longer feel protective. It would just feel small. That was the truest thing he ever gave me. Not because it was noble, because it was plain. My mother took longer. Almost a year. She finally came to see the hospital wing one afternoon, under the pretense of dropping off something my father had left at home. Which was so transparently false, I almost admired the effort. She stood in the atrium looking around at the nurses' station, the consult rooms, the polished donor wall, the interns moving too fast, and the general organized chaos of a real medical floor that had no interest in her emotional choreography. "You built this?" she asked. I understood what she meant. Not literally. Institutionally. Culturally. In role. I said, "Part of it." She nodded. Then, after a long pause, "You look right here." That sentence would have destroyed me at 22. At 31. It just made me tired and a little sad. Because that had always been the point. I had looked right in this life long before they were willing to admit it. Still, I took the sentence for what it was. Not redemption. Not maternal awakening. But a cracked door in a house built mostly of denial. Connor changed too. Not dramatically. More like weather softening over seasons. He started calling more, showing up sometimes at the hospital cafeteria on his lunch break from a sales job he hated but had finally learned to be honest about. Once he said, while stirring terrible chili, "I should have said something back then." I looked at him and answered, "Yes." He nodded. No self-defense. That mattered more than apology language ever would have. We are not suddenly the close siblings of sentimental television. But we are no longer standing on opposite sides of a joke he pretends not to remember. Noah and I married 2 years after I came back to Birmingham. Small ceremony. Warm afternoon. My father cried during the vows in the quiet. Bewildered way of a man realizing he is witnessing a whole adult life he once tried to reduce by force. My mother did not cry. She held my bouquet at one point, while I adjusted my shoe, and for a second. In the photographs, we look almost like the kind of women who could have had an easier history. I do not resent the photo. I just do not mistake it for the whole truth. People sometimes ask whether becoming a doctor proved my parents wrong. No, that's too small. It did something more useful. It made their limitations visible. My parents said I would never be a doctor and threw me out at 18. 10 years later, I walked back into their hospital wing as the new chief resident. People hear that sentence and think the climax is the title. It isn't. The climax is the corridor. The moment my father finally admitted he had preferred my early collapse to the risk of being wrong about me. The moment my mother realized status had dragged my dream beyond her ability to rank it down. The moment I understood, fully, that their belief was never the missing ingredient. Only the missing comfort. That distinction saved my life. If this story stayed with you, subscribe before you go. There are more of us than anyone admits. Daughters who were told to be realistic when what their parents really meant was stay comprehensible. Girls whose biggest crime was wanting a future no one at home felt qualified to authorize. Women who became everything they were mocked for believing in and then had to decide carefully what access those old voices deserved once they came back sounding softer. And if that's you, remember this. You do not need the people who laughed first to become the ones who clap loudest later. Sometimes the strongest ending is simpler. They watched you walk back in. You did not shrink. And the badge opened a door their approval never could.